David Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's been clear for many years that Iran is a rogue state, presided over by gangsters posing as clerics who seek to maintain control through the actions of thugs posing as police officers and militia. It's clear that the regime is terrified of losing that control, which is why they're now resorting to executing their own citizens for confected crimes. So does my honourable friend not agree that now is the time for the United Kingdom to position itself on the right side of history by declaring unequivocally that it supports the demands of the brave people of Iran for regime change in that country? And whilst he, I understand, will not comment on what proscription the government may be considering in the future, could he take it from me that there are very many honourable members who would be delighted if they woke up tomorrow morning to discover that the IRGC had been proscribed today?
I understand the points that my honourable friend makes. The destabilising activity of the IRGC, whether it's in Yemen or Iraq, Lebanon or Syria, very, very concerning in the region and beyond. We're constantly keeping that prescription under review, but obviously, as he knows, I can't comment at this stage.
Steve McCabe.
What measures is the government taking to curb the activities of agents of this regime attempting to operate in this country and elsewhere in Europe? And in particular, what actions are we taking to ensure that Iranians with diplomatic status in this country are genuine diplomats?
I can't comment on the detail, obviously, of these things. I'm sitting next to one of my esteemed colleagues at the Ministry of Defence. All these issues are constantly monitored.
Tom Hunt.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. There's lots of very grim things happening in the world, but I think many of us will be particularly troubled and disturbed by what is happening in Iran recently, and my heart goes out to everyone protesting, particularly the women and the girls. I support the views of many of my colleagues, and I do think that the IRGC should be listed as a terrorist organisation. But I'd like to ask my honourable friend, in terms of the Christian community in Iran, just this last Friday I met with somebody who fled Iran as a Christian, who's now a key part of a local church in Ipswich. What steps the government are taking to support the Christian community in Iran and many people who are fleeing persecution?
That's a very good question. It's a subject I feel very strongly about as well. I note that the honourable member for Strangford's in his place. He feels strongly about these issues too. We raise those issues about Christians, but not just Christians, other minorities as well in Iran, which we absolutely need to do.
Holly Lynch.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. We know that we have Iranian nationals here in the UK with very clear links to the regime. We also know that there are Iranian and Iranian heritage journalists in particular based here in the UK who have been subject to incredibly serious harassment and threats, and there's just been a recent report that there have been up to 10 assassination attempts on British residents this year from MI5. So can I ask him, what is he doing to work with his colleagues across government to make sure that those speaking out against the regime based here in the UK are safe, and that those who are propping up the regime living in the UK know that that is utterly unacceptable?
As I said previously, in response to a very serious issue that's been raised, the Foreign Secretary asked the Chargé d'Affaires to come into to the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and was made very clear to them in no uncertain terms that we do not allow or condone any of these activities in terms of intimidation. We're constantly monitoring that situation and we'll call that activity out.
Matthew Offord.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Iran's human rights activist news agency has reported that protesters have already been murdered and buried in unmarked graves. This is similar to activities that happened in 1988 with 30,000 people killed then, indeed when President Raisi was also involved with the organisation. But he will also know, as he has listed already, that the IRGC will orchestrate such behaviours, as indeed they did the bomb plot that targeted myself and the honourable member for Harrow East. So why we don't want the Minister to comment upon prescription, we simply want him, in the face of overwhelming evidence, to prescribe the IRGC in its entirety.
I thank my honourable friend for raising that issue, and I completely understand, given the circumstances he and other colleagues found themselves in, why this is particularly poignant for them. But it has much wider reach, as he says. And I also note that my honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, is in his place. He's very aware of these issues. He and I have had conversations about this, along with Lord Ahmed.
Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The women protesters in Iran are bravely protesting for the fundamental freedom to live their lives as they choose. The UK has a responsibility to support them. Can the Minister explain how the UK intends to do this?
Well, as others have said, it's vital that we support these brave Iranian people. It's a grassroots-led protest movement, and as I've highlighted, we've made sure that we are calling out this activity at every opportunity. We've put sanctions in place, and we're taking multilateral activity, one of which I think is very important is working with the US to remove Iran from the UN Commission on the Status of Women, which we've already talked about.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I join with my honourable friend for Harrow East and other honourable and right honourable members in reiterating my own call that the government should prescribe the IRGC. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is impossible to separate the Iranian regime's violent repression of its own civilian population from its broader ambitions for regional dominance and to develop a nuclear weapon. Today, the IAEA Board of Governors convenes for an important meeting to discuss Iran's many nuclear transgressions. Can my honourable friend assure me that the UK will be leading efforts to call for a motion of censure in light of Iran's flagrant breaches of the imploding JCPOA nuclear agreement?
Another important point, many dimensions in what's going on in Iran at the moment. But it's clear that Iran's latest actions have made progress on the Iranians' nuclear activity much more difficult. As I've said before, we're considering next steps with our international partners. But it's absolutely vital that Iran cooperates with the IAEA.
Anna McMorrin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over 14,000 protesters have been arrested in Iran since September, and now there is real concern that many of these brave women, journalists, activists, lawyers, educators, are soon to be executed by the regime. I'm grateful to the Minister for his answers to the questions today, but perhaps he could answer how the UK government is going to work with international partners to ensure the safety of these women and ensure they don't face the death sentence.
It's vital, as I've said, to make sure we call this out. I think the fact that we've seen common cause across the chamber today, a common voice in condemning these actions, and particularly not just the repression of these protests, but also the death sentences that have been meted out. We will continue to do that, and particularly in multilateral fora as well, as I've already highlighted. We need to keep putting the pressure on this brutal regime.
Mark Jenkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know the Minister has been pressed on these issues already today, but I think it's important that he hears the strength of feeling across this House. As the violent enforcer of the Supreme Leader of Iran, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps must be held accountable for its ongoing crimes against the Iranian people. As the principal financier and arms supplier of terror groups across the Middle East, it's also responsible for targeting innocent civilians from Iraq and Israel through to Yemen and the UAE, and has been linked to the deaths of over 100 British military personnel. Does my right honourable friend share my concerns and those of others across this House that the IRGC is likely undertaking activities in the UK, and does he agree that they must be proscribed?
I completely understand why my honourable friend has added his voice to concerns about the activities of the IRGC. We're concerned too. Their activities in country, but also in the region, are incredibly destabilising. And I cannot add anything else to what I've said about the prescription, but we monitor their activities and we'll call it out and confront it.
Margaret Farrier.
Madam Deputy Speaker, in light of the unacceptable response to protests by the Iranian authorities, what are ministers doing to ensure Iran is removed from the UN Commission on the Status of Women, as women have borne the brunt of many of the abuses?
As I said before, we're working with our international partners, working very closely with the United States on that particular and very specific point. She's right, it makes a difference, and we're going to push that forward.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for his response to the answers and for his desire and determination to assist the protesters in their quest for democracy in Iran. Iranian protesters are calling for a non-religious state where rights of women and religious minorities are protected, an issue that both I and the Minister share. The Tehran Revolutionary Court has stated that sentencing protesters to death on charges including, allegedly, enmity against God and corruption on earth. These charges have a chilling effect on the protesters and the religious minorities and have led to fears of large-scale executions in Iran in the coming weeks. So does the Minister agree with me that as a country we must pursue every available measure to support Iranians asserting their fundamental human rights and sanction officials responsible for these violent crackdowns? Thank you.
Well, my honourable friend always makes these points with conviction and with real passion. I share those views. We want to support the Iranian people in this struggle, and that is women, girls, and of course religious minorities too. We'll take every possible step forward that we can, and with the support cross-party here, we'll have extra weight and clout in making those calls for action.